Good morning, everybody. Depending on where you look, there are some people who have differing opinions about a certain class in Dungeons & Dragons Online, and that class is the sorcerer class. Now, I'm a big fan of the sorcerer class. I think it's very, very good for a lot of different things, and so I wanted to talk about it a little bit generally today, and also share with you a character that I've been playing. Actually, it's 3 characters that I've been playing, and all of the clips will be showing on screen right now. You get a bit of a variety. You see, there's some discrepancies depending on where you look for your information about how good or bad the sorcerer class is. Depending on the source that you decide to look to, you may find people telling you that the sorcerer class is actually really bad, and that recent changes to the sorcerer and adjustments to its cooldowns have made the class so bad that it's almost unplayable. Now, I wanted to address some of these concerns because, as somebody who's both a big fan of sorcerer and also happens to play with quite a few sorcerers, I think that these comments are hilarious. Mostly because sorcerer is one of the strongest, if not the strongest and fastest levelers in the entire game, making it one of the best builds you can possibly use for running through racial completionist, as well as dealing fantastic damage in the endgame, especially in quests, and making a monstrous crowd control bot, pretty much out competing every other crowd control character with the proper gear setup. Sorcerers are 100% one of the top performing classes in this entire game, and they succeed in so many different areas. They do have their pitfalls, and one of their major pitfalls happens to be raiding, where sorcerers kind of don't really have a place, but that's not really a sorcerer thing. That's more of a every single spellcaster in the entire game doesn't really have enough spell points to actually be able to beat the monsters kind of thing. But outside of that scenario, sorcerers are extremely versatile and crazy strong, like really strong, which is exactly why I am showing you some sorcerers right now, as characters that I played because I needed sorcerer past lives and deep gnome past lives for the ability to have everything that I need set up so I can turn a character of mine, my wonderful bard build, into a blade forged spellsinger. Now, sidestepping the reason for doing a blade forged spellsinger, I wanted the Deep Gnome pass lives for the Illusion DCs, and I wanted the Sorcerer pass lives for the Evocation DCs, and combining Deep Gnome and Sorcerer, while not being the best thing since Deep Gnomes actually get a minus to their Charisma, it was actually pretty good, given that I got 2 pass lives at the same time. For those of you that are fully unaware, iconic characters actually get 2 pass lives for the price of 1, both the iconic pass life and their heroic pass life. The downside is they have to level from 15 to 20, but the upside is those are the fastest levels. 15 to 20 is much faster than 1 to 15, not even including 1 to 20. As a result of this, while my character didn't have access to any capstones during that process, it was actually pretty strong, and regardless of which build I was playing, I was just kind of flying through the character. Sorcerer's strengths rely in its ability to output just so many spells, and so many spells faster than pretty much every other class in the entire game. Constantly throwing about fireballs, delayed blast fireballs, ball lightning, chain lightning, Autoluke's freezing sphere, cone of cold, meteor swarm, acid well, thunderstroke, iceberg, over and over and over and over. These spells are coming out like a machine gun of magic. Because if you did not know, sorcerers have half the cast time of other casters, so they cast twice as fast, which is made even faster by Quicken. On top of that, they also have shorter cooldowns, meaning they can cast faster and cast more spells. They also get more spell points to accommodate for this, giving them an extremely high output of magic, which is very, very, very good if you're trying to level quickly. During the early levels, if a Reaper spawns, you might have 1 or 2 spells you can cast, and then all of a sudden you're kind of stuck waiting for your spells to come back off cooldown so you can do something else. But sorcerer cooldowns are so short, you're pretty much just pressing only 1 button and just keeping spamming spells at monsters. This allows sorcerers to excel in the early game, the mid game, and even all the way through the late game, since they always have access to a certain number of spells. Now, I will say there is an obvious discrepancy if you happen to have a huge amount of pass lives, Reaper points, preset gear, and tomes. Your character will do a lot better as a sorcerer than somebody else who's playing as a first life character. However, if we put that in perspective as the actual difficulties that somebody may actually challenge with these types of characters, a first life sorcerer will scream through Elite and maybe Reaper 1 depending on the level range, but mostly Elite you'll scream through with 0 trouble whatsoever, blowing up every monster in 1 spell or less. Whereas somebody who has all of these other stats twinked out might be running R3 to 5 at the same speed. This is one of the reasons why a lot of people do enjoy using sorcerers for all their past lives, especially the racial ones, given the fact that they're so incredibly fast during the leveling process. Casting faster, moving quickly, and to top it all off, their enhancement trees are garbage. Complete garbage. The sorcerer trees are awful. Now this might sound really weird. How can you say they're awful if sorcerers are one of the best classes? The reason is the savant trees don't really give you a whole lot. They have some critical hit, chance with spells, they have some elemental bypassing from their capstones and one of their tier 5s, they have some spell-like abilities that are okay, but you usually have enough spell points, you don't really need them, and they give you some maximum cash levels out of the cores, which means that about 20 points that you're spending in any of your sorcerer savant trees pretty much don't do anything. Sure, you could grab elemental resistances. Maybe you could grab some efficient meta magic, even though you don't really use many meta magics on a sorcerer. You kind of just end up in this place where you're spending a lot of points, not really for extra effective game, but just to get closer to that capstone. And since this is the case, it means that during a large portion of the leveling process, you really don't need any points in your savant tree, letting you put points in all over into other trees. Maybe you want to go into falconry and pick up all this extra movement speed from sprint boost. Or maybe you just want to go Fade Arc Illusionist and pick up Greater Color Spray because of how powerful it is. As a result, you have this character that is super flexible during its leveling process to get movement speed, crowd control, defense, really whatever it is you want, as opposed to actually going into their damage tree and getting crazy high amounts of damage anyway. This is one of the things that's misunderstood about sorcerers, in my opinion the most, is that people think that because sorcerer is good, its enhancement trees must also be good, but actually they're mostly bad. Eldritch Knight is a good tree, but most sorcerers are not playing Eldritch Knights, they're playing Blasty sorcerers, and the savant trees really just don't live up to that class fantasy. I'm hoping the savant trees get a bit of a rework, not before other classes of course, but I still think it's something that should be on the table, as there's a lot of things they could do better with the savant trees that I think could be a little bit more interesting in my opinion. Now, if sorcerers are one of these be-all, end-all, super fast levelers, super easy to play characters, then where does some of the ideas that sorcerers have been changed, adjusted, or made useless come from? Because obviously these things don't exist in a vacuum. If somebody thinks that something has been nerfed, usually that comes from a patch note somewhere, or an actual adjustment to the character. And it's true, sorcerers did receive a nerf. A while back, sorcerers had some of their maximum caster levels taken away from their character. If you don't know, each individual spell that you cast has a maximum caster level on it, or rather a maximum power level of the spell. So for example, if I want to cast Burning Hands, its maximum caster level is 5. So if I'm level 5 sorcerer, I cast it, I get a certain amount of damage. If I'm level 6, unfortunately, the game only counts me as being level 5, so then all of a sudden my character is stuck, even though I'm level 6, not casting the spell as a level 6, but as a level 5. Sorcerers had the ability to increase their maximum caster levels, which was great, because it allowed you to cast spells at a higher level than you normally would otherwise be able to, and this is honestly one of the best ways to increase your damage, since it affects your base before all your other multipliers. Bumping up a spell from level 15 to 20 is a 33% increase in the amount of damage that you would normally be dealing, and that's a lot. So the first adjustment to Sorcerer is that they lost some maximum caster levels. Now the question is, did this brick Sorcerer? And the answer is no. 2 caster levels does hurt a little bit. However, Sorcerers are still very, 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 very good. Casting spells at twice the speed still has its advantages, and so if you can believe that being able to cast spells twice as fast as pretty much any other spellcaster is good, then you should also be able to believe that they weren't really in line with a lot of other spellcasters, and that's something that needed to get reined in. Now the second adjustment that was made to sorcerers is very interesting. This came with a large spell pass at the beginning of the year that adjusted many of the different character classes, and was also the inspiration for me making the free-to-play character builds that I did. They were all first life, well not really free-to-play, but first life for all the different spellcasters that got buffed. Sorcerers also got adjusted, as well as wizards, and I wanted to address this because many people believe it was a huge nerf that tore Sorcerer apart. The big adjustment was that of the 9th level spells that sorcerers and wizards get as arcanes, the most important one was Meteor Swarm. Meteor Swarm wasn't the highest in terms of single target damage, but it had really, really high area of effect damage. It wasn't entirely scaling properly, giving it extra stats, and it had the shortest cooldown. Now since it didn't give you the best damage per mana, you may not want to use something like this versus a better spell like Thunderstroke or Iceberg. However, since it had basically half of the cooldown, it actually ended up doing more damage anyway, giving your character the best and most efficient method to killing any monster, which was just spamming Meteor Swarm. This was adjusted to increase the cooldown of Meteor Swarm and actually bring its damage in line with some of the other spells. However, this also changed to make the other spells, Iceberg, Acid Well, and Thunderstroke, to have a lower cooldown to match Meteor Swarm, which means this was actually a buff to Lightning and Ice Sorcerer. Now, Ice Sorcerer was already a monster for single target damage, getting 100% spell critical chance, a ton of critical multiplier, and whipping out Iceberg, Polar Ray, Autoluke's Freezing Sphere, Cone of Cold, Cold Dragon Breath, Energy Burst Cold. You could do a lot of damage really fast. Bringing the cooldown to 6 seconds on Iceberg is a very big deal, and it jumps up the single target damage by a big margin. It used to be 9 seconds, so getting an extra 3 seconds off the cooldown might not sound like a big deal, like who cares? But as a sorcerer, you're literally casting spells as soon as they come off of cooldown because you cast so quickly. So now you're just whipping icebergs everywhere, and this is actually a big buff to lightning and cold sorcerers. So yes, the AoE dominance of fire sorcerers got reined in a little bit, but does this mean fire sorcerers are bad in R10s? Nope, fire sorcerers are still fantastic. They're still crushing rooms, they're still blowing up everybody. It just means they're not quite as dominant, and you have a place to bring in your lightning or your cold sorcerer, especially if you want a little bit more single target damage. You're still probably leaving both of these out of the raids, but what are you gonna do? Raids, you just don't have enough mana to kill the 12 million health bosses that happen to exist. I didn't really touch too much on crowd control sorcerer, mostly because it's something I don't particularly play. I haven't experimented around with it. However, I've had many people who play at this level that is above my own tell me that they're really enjoying using DC casting sorcerers, having extremely high DCs, and mana pools off the charts. So I'm inclined to believe some of the people that have told me about this, and I have no reason not to believe it. So I just wanted to give you a quick update about the sorcerer class so that you could know and feel confident going in what it is you should play. Now, if you are curious and you want to get a little bit more access to sorcerer, I am going to give you a link to a sorcerer that's a great start out that I think will help you out. It is a sorcerer from the hardcore build guides with a link in the description that you'll be able to find. This build is very, very good because it's a hardcore design sorcerer, which means it's going to work for everything that you want to do on the regular servers while being tanky enough and self-sufficient enough to be able to stay alive without dying. It also works well without any sort of items, so you don't have to worry about farming anything, and it can get you started on your sorcerer journey. The build itself is going to be a fire sorcerer, however, it can work for any of the different types. I just think that for the general leveling purpose, fire with a splash of acid or lightning is usually really good, as fire covers most of your bases, and then when you find something that happens to be immune to fire, you whip out a lightning spell or two and keep walking to the next room. If you haven't had the chance to try out Sorcerer, I think you'll have a good time, as it's a really strong class, and in the next patch, it's going to become very good. Update 50 is bringing along a bunch of adjustments to the spellcasters. One of the major adjustments is that monsters' spell save DCs are going down by a huge amount, which means if you're planning on being a spellcaster and fighting against most of the monsters, your spells are going to end up being more effective than they were before, dealing a higher percentage of the amount of the monster's health in damage on each spell, as well as having easier time landing your spells. This also means if you're somebody who's never really taken the time to get into the endgame, all of the gear that you have before you get up to level 30 is going to have a higher value than it did before, meaning it will actually be easier to find yourself getting into these larger endgame gear sets. In fact, you can even use some pre-endgame gear sets and work your way in, so that way you can start acquiring loot much easier than before, since the requirements are actually a lot lower. Now, of course, this is all in relation to the elite difficulty. The higher Reaper modes still dictate that you have the proper statistics, you have the proper know-how, you know what you're doing with your character, and you're ready to play by a very different strategy than you might normally play. But all the way up through the higher difficulties, and elite difficulty in particular, you're able to get a lot more damage and throughput out on these casters with very, very little requirement for having other types of stats. In general, I think Sorcerer is getting a huge buff, and many of the new items that are coming out from some of the new packs and some of the updated items from some of the older packs in the Scroll Seal Shard look really, really strong. Specifically, out of the Red Fens, there's the Shaman set, which gives 6% spell critical chance to all of your different spells. You won't necessarily need it for all of your spells, but if you're playing a type of character that needs some extra spell critical and you can't pick it up anywhere else, this will be a good place, and it fits Sorcerer very well for the actual set bonus. I'm definitely looking forward to picking through some of these new items and trying to figure out the right thing. And so, I also wanted to make a small announcement. Coming soon, I'm going to be posting a whole bunch of content around Update 50 and some of the new characters I'm going to be building with my brand new character that is a First Life that has nothing and is going to be going at the world again, building up everything I can so I can share some builds with you guys. But with that being said, usually I include an item build, even if it's just a rudimentary one, like a little bit of a rubric to help you get started. I'm still going to be including those with my character builds that I end up posting for you, but just be aware that those actual character builds and the item builds might be a little wonky as I'm still trying to learn how to use and incorporate all of the items that we have, especially as many of them are likely changed since Lemania to now, and there's going to be a lot of information we need to find. So if you're wondering if you see me posting a build guide and you see no Sans gear or no Red Fens gear, especially right away, it's not that these items are bad, it's that I literally don't even know how to incorporate them. There's like 900 items and I need a doctor right now to help organize my brain. This is too much. Oh God, please help. The items are exciting and I can't wait to put my hands on them, but in the meantime, I will likely be posting things with the tried and true, your Sharn sets, your Feywild sets, and going from there. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, make sure you tune in because we're going to be streaming all day with the Update 50 on August 4th, which as time of recording is tomorrow. So please join me on twitch.tv/Strimtom. And if you haven't done that yet, just join me in general. We're going to be talking about all this stuff and it should be a fantastic time. I'm going to disappear because I want to play DDO. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.